hello and welcome to this week's episode of Rebel City Podcast. This week's guest is Eve Livingston. How's it going, Eve?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problems at all. Thanks for coming on.
Yep, nice to meet you.
I had been sort of alerted to yourself by a tweet about sort of freedom of speech, and this is something that's been coming up quite a lot recently, just in normal conversations, but also talking to people. I think we've touched on it a wee bit with the podcast, but we've not really went into it because it's almost like a subject it's been hijacked, I feel, by a certain sort of section of society. But I think before we get into that, do you want to just tell people like just a wee bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a freelance journalist based in Glasgow. Although I work across the UK, so I do lots of work for like The Guardian and Independent and stuff. And I mostly cover sort of social affairs and politics, I guess, with a particular focus on inequalities. So, you know, stuff around feminism and poverty and any of that kind of thing, really. But freedom of speech, and in particular, the way that it's been hijacked, as you've just mentioned, is also quite a big interest of mine.
So you've got the No Offence newsletter that I subscribed to earlier on the day, but I had a chance to actually read. But I read there was an article and like a sort of script to a speech that you had done. So why do you think freedom of speech has been hijacked? So in what way has it been hijacked?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really kind of complicated issue. I think there's two things. The first thing is that like freedom of speech and threats to it do exist and are huge and like a really pertinent issue. And I don't think that, I mean, maybe it goes without saying, but I'm coming from a left-wing journalist perspective, and I don't think the left have always been great at having that conversation. But the way that the conversation's played out in the media, particularly in the last, I don't know, I guess 5 to 10 years, has been what I would say is an almost completely fictional sort of story told by the right to essentially do the opposite of free speech. I think to blunt dissent and to crack down on protest and to get rid of viewpoints that challenge them. So it's quite ironic the way that it's been kind of employed in the media. So we see all these conversations about, protests on university campuses and no platform policies and safe spaces and all this kind of language. And the right are going on and on and on about how these are like huge threats to free speech and we're living in an authoritarian state and all of that. But at the same time, they're ignoring real threats to free speech. So journalists being threatened and imprisoned, things like that just happened the other week where KCL Uni in London, the Queen went to visit and the university administration blocked student activists' cards so they couldn't get access to the building while the Queen was there. And they did that on the basis of people that they'd seen protesting previously. So that's like a very clear example of textbook sort of freedom of expression viation, but you didn't see those right-wing kind of media voices up in arms about that.
I mean, look at the if we using America as an example, the deplatforming and whatnot of guys like Alex Jones and so on and so forth has obviously caused a big sort of furore. But on the other side of things, you've got Khashoggi being assassinated by the Saudi government, and the American president going, "That's cool, they buy weapons off us, don't worry about it." And you're like, those two things kind of realistically coexist in a free society for me. You know what I mean? Like you're either hammering people on free speech or defending it. You can't really do both. You know what I mean?
It's exactly that. I think they're just using. I mean, it's really clever, actually, because what it allows the right wing to do is to kind of frame their dislike and wish to crack down on left-wing ideas in a sort of framework that looks really progressive. So they're saying, like, we're just sticking up for freedom and like a pluralistic society, but they're actually using it to do the opposite. So you know, it's a very clever reframing that they've done, and they've been largely successful because it's all over the press all the time. Every time they, even like a really minor sort of student incident, you know, like one small student society at a random campus in somewhere in England who like disinvite a speaker, that society's probably got like 10 members. You know? It's probably, the meetings are probably like 3 people coming along and drinking a pint, and somehow that manages to make headline news because of the way that this has been
they sort of mobilise their hordes.
Exactly.
Do you think that so like that is something that is really important, I think, that this idea, because there is a lot of talk about deplatforming, and especially like sort of people that go and speak on university campuses in America. There's almost, I heard the first time yesterday that the cultural Marxism bomb getting dropped, and I think that's something that, if you're really up on this topic in America, that they talk about cultural Marxism quite a lot. And why is there this sort of tend to be afraid of university campuses or college campuses in America? It's like, what was the one that I'd heard, that Marxist, socialist, feminist college lecturers? That was the actual quote that somebody used. And I was thinking,
it's the framing that you're talking about.
How do you know what that person, like, based on what? Based on the fact that they didn't want some sort of rape culture guy going and doing a speech at their college. Like, why is this becoming such a big sort of issue for people?
I suppose the university thing in particular, for me, it's probably about two different things. And the first is that universities are like an easy target for this, because they are traditionally held up as being this sort of bastion of free speech, and you go there to have these debates and to challenge each other's views. And I mean, I think that's quite a rose-tinted idealistic view of how a university operates anyway, because especially in the current political situation, when they're so they can be very kind of corrupt, and the way they're funded is not transparent or in the interests of free speech or free expression. But anyway, this kind of popular idea that that's what those places should operate to do. And then that complemented with the idea that actually a lot of students and lecturers are quite left-wing and progressive. Because I think it's an oversimplification to say that it's purely a generational thing, but I think it's fair to say that a lot of younger people becoming politically engaged now in the sort of extreme situation that we're in are more radical than people were in previous generations. So I think the right wing find that incredibly threatening. So that's why they're trying to crack down on that group in particular. But it's not just in America. It happens in the UK too. And the speech that you referred to in the introduction was actually because I was a student union officer when I was at Edinburgh Uni in 2014, it would have been. And that was kind of right when the free speech thing on campuses in the UK was like starting to creep in. And I don't know if people remember this story, but it was a huge story at the time where Edinburgh Uni student officers the year before me, so it wasn't a decision that I was involved in, had taken the song Blurred Lines by Robin Thicke off of the playlist. So it's this R&B song, and it's got all these lines. I mean, it's called Blurred Lines, and it's got these lyrics about it says like, oh, I know you want it even if you say no. It's like that kind of thing. Right. And the argument was that this is like a really like rapey song. And
which, I mean, it definitely was. I mean, there was an uncensored version of the video that had like 5 or 6 naked women just pandering over these guys.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? It was. I mean, I think when I first heard that song, I just thought, whatever, it's just another shit pop song. But then when you listen to the lyrics,
a good pop song, but I just drew the line at pop song.
But when you
it's actually quite catchy.
That's almost like some of the argument that's made, isn't it? Is that like, but I like it.
Exactly.
But I like the song, and it's like, do you listen to the lyrics? I think this is part of.
But I mean, that was also like part of the conversation. Was like all that had happened there was that those officers had said, "Let's take it off the playlist in our venues." It wasn't like a censorship. It wasn't like if you come into the building, we're going to check your mobile phone to see if you're listening to it on your headphone.
Which would actually be totalitarian.
I mean, that would be ridiculous. So that got spun into this massive thing. So I kind of came into that role in the aftermath of that. And it was when this conversation was kind of starting up in the UK, or not starting, but like getting kind of really big in the UK. And there's Spiked, who's like an online right-wing magazine, who've been right at the forefront of this sort of putting forward this sort of culture wars, free speech framing from the right. They launched this campaign called Down with Campus Censorship and came round university campuses doing debates and stuff. And the speech that you referenced in the opening that I gave was at one of those debates where their editor came and debated with me and a couple of students on a panel about all these issues. And that was 5 years me, obviously. No, I'm only kidding. I mean, it was, what I would say is I do quite a lot of those events even now, sort of just panel discussions and debates and stuff, and that's definitely the most hostile and tense one that I've been to. I mean, people were really finding it quite difficult, I think, to hear some of the stuff that was being said. I remember the guy from Spiked saying something like about racism on campus about people just have to be exposed to racism so that they know what the real world's like.
Okay.
I mean, shock therapy to racism. And
he was just saying these
intolerance.
totally bizarre things, you know, with no kind of remorse or compassion. So
I think that's the juxtaposition in Summit as well, isn't it? When something like the campaign against censorship, it sounds on the surface of it as though you're like, you know what, I'm all behind that.
Sounds great.
And then the guy stands up and goes, so racism's cool because, and you're like, hold on a minute. You know what I mean? Like, there's this whole like diametric thing that happens where you find a lot of the stuff that's actually named as though it is progressive and liberal. When you actually meet or, you know, get under the surface of it, you're like, hold on a minute, these guys are like right-wing crackpots.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's almost like, there's this new sort of, I'm not left, I'm not right, I'm a classic liberal, which is like, I'm liberal, but I'm not as liberal as what people today are. I'm a 1950s liberal, which was, I like racism, I like misogyny, but I want to be liberal in my life as a white man, almost. Something like that. I don't know what my thoughts are on that. I hate that sort of saying, like, I'm a classic liberal. It's almost like a trigger warning for me now, where I'm like, right, so basically, you want to be stuck in the 50s. We were talking off mic before you turned up about, like, sort of freedom of consequence. And the Tommy Robinson situation with Mike Stotchbury. I don't know if you've kept up on this, where Tommy Robinson's used his platform of freedom of expression to sort of stalk and encourage violence on another human being, but when it's turned around on him, you see him on Katie Hopkins' interview sitting crying salty tears about his PTSD that he got for his 50 days.
Because he didn't have a telly in his jail.
It's
one of the kind of things as well, and this is where we were on it, is that like people think that their right to free speech is absolute, and I think this is part of where the problem that we're in at the moment with these, as you say, sort of right-wing elements that want to come out and say whatever it is they feel they're entitled to say, but they don't have to live with the consequences of their actions, and it's not really up for me, because like free expression for me is a social contract as much as it is a right, and that if you're going to say something in the public domain, you do have like a responsibility to make sure that, well, at least in the past, it was accurate. I mean, this is where we then move into like fake news territory and all that kind of stuff. You can't have one without the other, and I think the people that are the biggest advocates of free speech and free expression in certain elements are the ones that are the worst offenders for, well, hold on, you can't punish me for that because you can't hold me to account for that because I was expressing my free will or whatever. You're like,
But I think that's, to some extent, they're right, because Tommy Robinson has kind of, I mean, he's, you know, got into a bit of trouble, but he's still this huge, like, figurehead, doing all these protests and stuff. So he has managed to escape consequence for a lot of what he's done. So they're not wrong when they say that. That's because that's their lived experience of being these quite privileged, like, loudmouth white guys who can say what they want and get away with it. And that's why the conversation is so artificial and cynical, because when you talk about things like I don't want to be too jargony, but like these no platform policies, when you won't have certain speakers, or safe spaces when you've got certain kind of rules about meetings and what can and can't be said, what they do is protect the free speech of more vulnerable, marginalised people who typically haven't been able to speak free from consequence. Because anything you say as like a Muslim woman, for example, will be like spun and interpreted in a million different ways and pulled apart and criticised in a way that Tommy Robinson's speech will never be. So it's a completely cynical sort of turning on its head of everything that free speech should be about.
Yeah. But do you think that there is a place for, I mean, there does, I don't know if it's just me and my sort of, obviously like my own bias that I've got, but do you think there's a place for him in sort of BBC? I mean, he seems to get himself on the BBC a lot, like, and there seems there's always the internet.
Also Nigel Farage.
Yeah, people like UKIP that almost seem like marginal themselves, but they get this massive platform to go and sit on a panel where like Conservative, Labour. So when we're expecting an actual debate from like the mainstream politics on things like Question Time or whatever it might be, there also seems to be these very small groups that are put there almost to like shitster, it feels to me. Do you think there is a place for that we should be engaging in with these people on mainstream media, or do you think it should just be like, don't engage.
Yeah, I suppose there's a few different things. One is it gets you into this real existential question about the role of media and politics, and whether media is there to reflect public opinion or to lead it. And politics has that same, or party politics has that same question, and I don't think anyone's quite come up with the answer to that. But I mean, what I would say is, you kind of touched on it there. These views are marginal. I mean, they're growing. Arguably, they're growing because people keep getting given these platforms to spread those ideas.
Do you think that they're growing because we've just had? I mean, this is just thinking about these things though. But the fact that they've been quashed, so sort of post Blair Britain and post sort of Clinton America, right up to sort of the end of Obama, even though they had George Bush in the middle. These ideas have been sort of like, you can't say that. That's almost been until maybe the last sort of 5 years, where it's been like this sort of wave of, we need to be able to say these things, and like you're saying, the sort of hijacking of free speech. But I don't know if it's the platform that they've been given in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, or if it was the years that preceded that have caused this sort of like, did the bigotry and the intolerance go away, or did it just sit underneath and fester away to then, now with the birth of the internet, people see their views being, I mean, with the echo chamber, you can almost, you could Google anything, you know what I mean? You could Google, is the earth flat? And you'll get positive affirmation that, yeah, the earth is flat.
Yeah.
So as these views come up and come out, and people are coming onto social media and seeing their own opinions being said by other people, it's almost like, I'm right.
Yeah.
So I'm caught between, I think that I'm caught between the platform is causing this, and maybe even the ideas that you shouldn't think like that have caused this sort of festering within individuals.
I think there's quite a kind of nuanced cause and effect thing there, which is that definitely when someone is sort of invited onto a TV show or whatever, and then has that platform withdrawn, that absolutely puts the ball in their court to then be like, well, you can't say anything anymore, you know, and rile up their audience and get them on board. But if someone's just not taken seriously and invited on in the first place, that's quite a different thing, I think. And no platforming does work. Like if you look at Milo Yiannopoulos, who's the kind of alt-right figure that was associated with Trump and various kind of alt-right groups and stuff.
He's a deplorable.
He's horrendous. He said all kinds of
That's the
awful
gay guy that
things.
hates gay people.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
He was kind of repeatedly no platformed, and his is kind of interesting story because he got kind of like his own side kind of turned against him because of some things that he'd said, which is a whole other thing because it shows that there are lines on what they'll accept as free speech and not. But anyway, he was kind of did have this fall from grace, and he's now bankrupt and like selling all his belongings online. And Katie Hopkins similarly just recently has been online kind of begging for donations on PayPal and stuff because she doesn't get invited anywhere. So it's not just a kind of moral thing. You do also kind of hit these people and these movements where it hurts by taking away sort of funding and resource from them. And I think that's an important part of the conversation too, is that it has kind of worked in those cases.
Yeah. Do you think, on the Alex Jones part though, he is actually making more money since but I suppose he's a figurehead. He's very different to like Hopkins, who's
a lightning rod, isn't he?
He's been about since the 90s, and also he's got a massive following. But he's actually started making more money since he got deplatformed. It's been the best thing that ever happened to that guy. I mean, he was on Joe Rogan and he was crying about it. But I then read an article where people were saying ultimately he's delighted that this has happened because he's getting more followers on Infowars.com than he's ever had before. And that means pure money rather than YouTube taking a wee slice or taking the 90% and giving him the 10%. He gets the full 100%.
Well, that's what I mean about the difference.
He's a lightning rod in that sense.
And he was able to flip that narrative because he was originally being invited onto these things. So he can then turn it around and say, I'm being oppressed here. Whereas that's why I would kind of say that the best approach is just to like not really engage with this stuff to begin with. I mean, we're too late for that, unfortunately. But there is a kind of subtle difference there in approaches if you're like a broadcaster or someone who plans like events and debates and stuff.
In terms of broadcasters, I think obviously one of the big things for me is the notions of bias and how that's sort of slightly changed. And I think it ties in with no platform in a sense that I think in the past and I think you touched on it yourself, we gave guys like Nick Griffin, for example, time on Question Time, and people were like, how can we have the leader of the BNP on Question Time? How can we give this guy this exposure? Like, it's wrong. And he went on and he looked like an absolute dick, and then that was how he was done. And I'm like,
but the BNP increased in membership after that, though, so it was more complicated. This is the thing. And at the time when that happened, because I worked at the BBC briefly at the TV Centre in London just after the Nick Griffin thing,
all right.
And I remember people saying to me from that team about how it really caused this huge tension within the production, where other guests wouldn't share a green room with him. He had to come in a separate entrance. Some staff refused to work on the night that he was on Question Time. I mean, can you imagine that happening now? It shows you how far the conversations
and
switch.
That's kind of what I was going with, is that, like, we went for somebody like Nick Griffin, for example, being this huge point of contention that he was getting on mainstream television, to something, again, like Question Time, for example, having, as I say, a UKIP member of staff or MP or MEP or whatever it is, somebody in that sort of neck of the woods on an almost weekly basis. But where the bias for me comes in, and where it's important to, like, call it out, is that UKIP have always traditionally polled in and around the same numbers as the Green Party.
Yeah.
But there's no a member of the Green Party or somebody who is pro-green or, you know, environmental or whatever it is that's there with the same platform, the same amount of time to actually come and make their points. And that's where, you know, free expression, free speech becomes important to me, is that if we're going to get to people on the extremes of a debate, then we need to also get to the people who represent as many of the country as, you know, these demagogues do.
It's a totally false sense of balance when they, especially in Scotland. I mean, there's the issue recently of the guy, I can't remember his name, the guy who'd like trained his dog to do Nazi salutes, and he got
Dankula.
Yeah, that one.
We've been debating whether or not to get him on the podcast.
Oh right.
But
Let's try.
We sort of got to the crux of, we would probably end up arguing with him.
I don't know. I mean, has he got anything interesting to say?
Well, he's a member of UKIP.
But this is the thing. So he got prosecuted of a hate crime, right?
Yeah.
So he
it get acquitted, I'm sure, or whatever our thing may an appeal.
Okay, right. I didn't realise that. But anyway, so he'd gone through this case and he got invited to take part in this show on the new BBC Scotland channel, and there's big uproar about it, and he eventually got taken off that show, which again is this thing that I'm talking about, gives him this brilliant narrative. But what was really weird about that was, in Scotland there's no evidence of any real like base of support for views like his, so why do we need to have them represented?
I think he's just a shit. My experience is he's just a shit poster.
He started he started out under a sort of, I'm a comedian sort of, that
it's definitely
quite
really funny.
Again, I know. Again, comes from America though. That's like an American sort of stance, where protect comedy, because the stand-up comedians, we should be the people that push the envelope. Right, okay. But then he's in Brussels with Farage, with his fucking Tesco suit on, with a big smile on his face, and you're like, you're not just a comedian, mate. You've used that to get yourself notoriety, and now somehow you've got like a couple of hundred wee guys that think you're fucking god.
It's the opposite of being like an edgy outsider. Yeah. It's like right in the middle of the establishment.
Exactly. Which, I mean, this isn't on my list, but how do you feel about that sort of twist on the establishment that people like Farage have managed to create, almost like Trump? Anti-establishment, come on to fuck, like fake, like the sort of
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, like these people that are managing to come out and be like sort of anti-establishment.
I'm the outsider.
Very much indoctrined into the establishment. They're right in the centre of it, like you were saying. Like, how do they do that? How the fuck does that happen?
I know, this is what I mean. It's very similar to the way that they've hijacked this free speech conversation. They're actually really good at branding and at dictating a narrative, and the left haven't been as good at that. I mean, you mentioned the Green Party earlier. You know, I'm big fans of a lot of what the Green Party have done and a lot of their representatives, but they've never tried to embrace that kind of outsider, radical thinking thing. And arguably, they would be more successful if they did. They've kind of always tried to say, you know, we're represented in Parliament, like, and make all these very, very logical and rational arguments about equal kind of representation on TV and all of that stuff because of their parliamentary representation. But if they really like embrace that kind of similar narrative of we're on the outside, you know, we're with you, we're also sort of pushing in to try and change things, and and they've never done that. Not to single out the Greens specifically, but they're just a good counter example from
absolutely.
the left. But the right wing they've been amazing at doing that. It's really frustrating to watch because it's so clever and effective.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching, and again, we're discussing it off mic just before you came in. I watched Divide and Conquer. I think it's Sky Atlantic are running it, and it's the story of Roger Ailes and Fox News, and how they consciously made that choice to take news in a emotional and sort of personal direction. And I say it's been hugely successful. They've led to the ascension of presidents and all sorts of stuff across the world, wars and all the rest of it as a result. But like, we don't have that counter on the left, that's something like that mainstream kind of like, well, here's this huge mainstream platform where we can put all these sort of left-leaning ideas out, because so much of the media is, at least sort of slightly right-leaning, if no worse. You know what I mean?
And also because the right have been really good at getting on board the people that the left should have got on board. So if you think of like the kind of narrative about the Brexit vote and all that, I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage and all that are sort of claiming to be the greatest ally to like the working class who've been shafted by austerity, right? I mean, all that they're doing is selling out the people they claim to represent, because they're like shacking them up with millionaires who are exploiting them. And the left should be the natural home for those people, but we've failed in a lot of ways to do that. I mean, not universally. I think there's been some really good movements, and there are plenty of like working class left wing people. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on like a whole class of people, but I just mean in terms of the sort of campaigning narrative. That's who they've targeted.
I think that's got a lot to do with, and again, we talk about Blair and beyond when it comes to like the Labour Party. Like, they became kind of almost centre right in a lot of respects when the people who traditionally voted them were looking for left wing. And I know obviously in '97 when Blair came in, that was a massive change for a lot of people, but what we've been left with in the aftermath of it is a lot of middle ground and a lot of sort of centre right policies, even to this day, still coming from the Labour Party. So I think when the people who are traditionally meant to stand up for the rights of these working class people don't, as they have failed to do a number of times, people are going to look for alternatives. And I think this has been one of them that people have obviously jumped on, not necessarily understanding it fully, but the broad strokes that guys like Farage and Mogg and Johnson and that have been able to paint for people are in a hue that appeals to them.
Well, it's that thing of how neoliberalism looks really good maybe when it's like more left wing than what came before, but all it does is like set the ground for more extreme right wing ideas. I mean, it reminds me of, there was like it must have been an anti-Donald Trump march, and there was a picture of it, and there's someone with a placard that said, if Hillary had won the election, I'd be at brunch right now. And it really sums up like all the problems, because like, maybe you would be, but all that would have done is like stem the tide for a few more years. There's still all this stuff bubbling up underneath that we all failed to engage with beforehand. And it's policies like that of Hillary Clinton and Tony Blair and this sort of neoliberal establishment that bolster the right and set the groundwork for it. So it's so frustrating that that's the terms that the debate is dictated within.
The left, I mean, I find it hilarious. I watch a lot of sort of American podcasts, and I find it hilarious when they refer to Barack Obama as the left. And you're just like, really? Like, what the fuck? Or Hillary Clinton is the left. It's like,
I mean, I've got
it's left at Donald Trump, but
sure,
I mean, I think
I've got more time. I've got a bit of time for some of the things that Barack Obama did, and I don't have any time for some of the other things that he did. But he's working within a system that didn't allow him to do a lot of stuff that I think he would have done.
I agree with that. I think that for me, he probably thought that he could change a lot, and when he gets in, it's like, you can change nothing. Like,
and I respect that he came from a sort of community organising background in a way that Hillary, and I don't mean to trash Hillary Clinton in terms of, it would have been a great symbolism to have a woman president and all of that stuff. Although that's definitely not a panacea.
I don't think she's the right woman though.
No, neither do I. And she didn't come from that. She doesn't come from that community organising sort of grassroots background. She just comes from an establishment, like Upper East Side kind of.
Part of what I see the problem on the left is that it's almost like there's no room for sort of movement within it. So people that were voting, that said, especially in America, that I don't want to vote for Trump, but I don't want to vote for Clinton, was almost seen as some sort of like, that's offensive to me that you're not going to vote for Hillary because she's the Democrat. And it's almost like, but we don't, surely there must be something different to like right and right. There needs to be something that, and I think that is a problem that we're seeing, that the left is so divided on so many issues, and that it seems to be prevalent in people my age and younger, that if you don't agree with them 100%, it's almost like, well, we don't agree on anything. Like, I can't listen to what you've got to say on any subject, because in this one thing, we don't see eye to eye. Yeah,
but I wonder if that's more a sort of structural, like, systems thing than it is a sort of ideological issue. Because, like, in the US example, I mean, I absolutely would have voted for Hillary Clinton in that election for lack of any better alternative and to keep Donald Trump out. But that's because that system is completely ridiculous. You know, where there's only ever two viable candidates. And as you say, they both come from within, you know, quite a small range of each other. I don't mean that sounds like I'm saying Hillary Clinton is the same as Donald Trump, which I would not say.
But if there's a spectrum,
but there's
right,
exactly. There's a large part of that spectrum missing from that conversation, and it's the same with the sort of party political system in the UK. It kind of forces you to think in these terms of, as you say, like full agreement or
completely
or
right or completely wrong. That's it. It's like you're right or wrong. There can't be like a sort of middle ground between. Oh, I quite like some of the... There's a lot of the conversations that I have with like friends where I say to them, well, I quite like some of the ideas of the right, not necessarily the right that you see on the newspaper, but some of the actual fundamental ideas of capitalism would work if it was kept in check. For instance, if we didn't let corruption go fucking wild, we didn't let the markets dictate how people live, and there are some ideas in the left, and I think that the politics of a mixture of both has got to be the way forward. Like, I don't,
for example, like the national or the potential renationalisation of like railways and post offices and stuff like that. I mean, those are something that will be dismissed as an almost like, you know, I know it's not really like a sort of socialist policy, whatever it is, but like the media and the right tend to use these terms in a dismissive manner, and the minute they hear people, particularly in the UK and in America, that it's communist, it's socialism, it's what it's Marxism or whatever it is, and it's intended to turn people off. But like when you look at something like the railways, they were never run better than when they were in public ownership. You know what I mean? Like, so there is a balance that can be struck between what's best for the public and what's, you know, ideologically what your party you're voting for after. You know what
I mean, not to go down like a total sort of theoretical route, but like loads of left-wing ideas and ways of doing things that would be dismissed as these sort of pie in the sky, like communist utopia ideas are way more like productive in terms of even like in capitalist terms, in terms of like economic productivity and like the money that you can make back on things. So, you know, things like universal basic services, for instance, which is kind of discussed in these terms of like, oh, you know, complete like wouldn't happen in a million years. But like all the evidence shows that it would be like really good for even in a capitalist society. Absolutely. It would generate like public good, it would generate public money, and loads of, when you drill down, like loads of left-wing ideas, free public transport is the same. The right and our party political system seem to only be able to interrogate things on this very like surface level that's like mainly ideological and also sort of like immediate, like what's the immediate impact of something like that. Well, we have to pay for it, well, we won't do it then, rather than, you know, looking kind of at how it would actually work in practice.
So again, it's about how it's been framed, and I think this is something that we were again talking about in the build up to this, was like, I think there's a number of debates going on in the public domain that are framed in very simplistic, very sort of reactionary terms in a lot of cases. Obviously, we've had the recent debates around Brexit, which have been really polarised, Scottish independence. Even on a lower level, I've seen on your Twitter feed, obviously, there's a number of instances you calling it like sort of transphobia and homophobia and stuff like that. And again, I think those debates as well are also had in very sort of stark terms in a lot of times. And I think when we talk about what's all right to say and what's not right to say, it becomes a bit of a minefield even when you're sort of well-intentioned a lot of times. But I think there's a lot of people that are maybe afraid of some debates now because of the potential outrage and sort of offence they might cause other people. And I think that's all about how these conversations are framed in like really simplistic terms, you know what I mean? Like, I think, like, for example, the one I was trying to get to grips with in the build-up to this was the sort of transphobia side of things. Like, I have absolutely no issue whatsoever with anybody being, you know, who they are. I don't understand the journey they're on. But then when I try to get information or, you know, try to talk to somebody about the journey that somebody in that, you know, life is on, what I get is discussions about what toilets they should use. And I'm like, how does that help anybody? Like, there's really, really simplistic terminology to frame a really complex debate, and it happens across a number of things in modern life. How do people navigate it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think you are right in that that's people's experience of being like worried to engage with certain topics and stuff. But I think that's also a product of this sort of like artificial thing. Like, I don't think there are many people, well-meaning people on the left, who would attack someone for using the wrong word, or you know, if it's clear that someone's well-meaning and engaging in good faith, I'm not going to jump down their throat because they use the wrong terminology or whatever. It's just not something I would do, and I don't know many people that would. So I think it's almost like a straw man, like a fake argument that's been constructed.
Do you think that's fake news almost? That we need to be scared to engage in certain discussions? Because
I think the right would like people to believe that, like that it's, you know, because it fits in with that narrative of like, oh, the left will just, you know, cast you out forever if you use the wrong word.
I find it interesting that you can't almost, and especially, I keep going back to America, but you can't say the word feminist without almost sort of saying Marxist. They've kind of went, right, here's something that people fear, let's just put the two of these together and just make them some kind. Somebody had said on a podcast, you would think if you open your front door that you're going to get eaten by a rabid Marxist, feminist, transgender like woman. That's what you feel, but it's not true. And when you meet these like transgender people, they're not the way that they're sort of portrayed. They're almost like the anger in the trans community. It doesn't exist. It's almost like it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole different debate, isn't it? Because I would say even if trans people are really angry, like, I would say that they're very justified to be so after the way they've been treated.
Yeah, especially like recently. I mean, like you're saying, that it's been used as like almost as like a sort of fear tactic for people. It's like put out there for people to go, oh, don't want that.
And it's been used to back up the debate that we like started talking about around free speech and offence and all of that stuff. It's very much like being pushed into that territory of like I remember when I was a student officer, and Spiked, who I mentioned, the right-wing magazine, they did this ranking thing. I don't know if they still do it every year, where they look at different university and student association policies, and they give you like a red, green or yellow rating depending on how much they think you're threatening free speech, right? So they gave Edinburgh, where I was, a red ranking, as in like we were really putting free speech in danger. And one of the reasons they gave for that was that the university had a policy of referring to trans students by the gender that they said they were. So like if I say I'm a woman, then they would call me a woman. Like, I can't think of anything that's more an example of free expression. But they took that, because it's like against their ideology, they took that as like a threat to free expression. So in a way, it's like a really pure example of exactly like how these things operate.
They wouldn't be able to express themselves in the terms that they want. You're hard.
And because they see it as like the progressive left are telling us all what to think, you know. But I can't. I mean, what's a more pure example of free expression than
this is who I am.
This is
How do you think, or what's your thoughts on the Jordan Peterson Canada sort of episode, where I don't actually know, I didn't read the legislation, but the Canadian government tried to legislate that the pronouns would be against the law for you not to address somebody in the pronoun that they wanted to be addressed by. Do you think that that's a move in the right direction or not? Like, do you think we should be legislating how you refer to people?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing. I think legislation is often used as like a really blunt instrument to try and just like end these discussions and debates, and it doesn't necessarily work. Like, even if that's legislation that kind of is in line with like my take on the subject, but I don't think it's necessarily the right instrument. It doesn't shut down any of that hostility.
Because personally,
and then you're going to jail somebody for deliberately using a word.
Yeah, I mean that's
personally,
madness, isn't it?
if anybody, I think myself as a nice person. So if somebody said I want to be called this, of course.
Yeah, no skin off your back, is it?
I mean, what's it got to do with me? Like, actually, like, that's the kind of question that I want to ask a lot of these people. Is like, what's it got to do with you? Like,
exactly.
If there is somebody that's born male and they grow up and they decide that they want to transition into female and then want your respect, because that's really what you're giving them. They want your respect enough for you to refer to them as they want to be referred to. What has it got to do with you?
I mean, if I say to you, my name's Eve, and you go, oh, well, I'm just going to call you Jennifer. I mean, what's the point in that?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's I don't really see what the difference is. It makes no difference to me at all to treat someone the way they want to be treated.
The debate's getting pushed into, I mean, I don't know if you've seen, I can't even remember the athlete's name, the woman that's like the Olympian.
Oh, the Sharon Davis.
Sharon Davis, the sort of trans women in sport. I think I think
she's approached that quite well in terms of how she's discussed it with people. You know what I mean? Like she's, as much as it's one of the ones I can get her point. I think she's saying that if people are physically different, then there should be different classes for that to be the case. And I'm like, I don't necessarily disagree with that.
No, I don't either, but it is so small.
And the percentage is tiny.
I've seen this story about the MMA fighter, retweeted about him out and people referring to it, and it happened once.
Yeah.
And a very, very small, didn't happen in the UFC. We've not got like trans women and like the Scottish women's football team like kicking lumps out people. It just the outrage that Sharon Davis is sort of like jumping on board on again almost doesn't exist.
I think that's exactly it. I haven't engaged that much with the sport argument specifically, but one of the things that I did see was like I think it was a sports scientist tweeted like how frustrating she found the whole debate because there are already these regulations in place and they already work. So it's just come out of nowhere.
It's about managing levels of
using examples of amateur sport is not,
that's pure anecdotal.
I could go down a football park and play football with 10-year-olds and kick fuck out them and win the game. Are you going to get the right wing at the side of the park videoing and going, this man shouldn't be playing with these kids?
Yeah.
Because every example that's been used is amateur sport almost.
Well, probably should.
No, definitely. I mean, I'm not advocating that fully grown men put an 11-a-side team and get themselves entered into the under-10s. Not at all. But this is the type of thing that's actually getting used. It's like amateur sports. It's like very nuanced, very small instances where this type of thing's happened and people are actually like, I feel this. I feel this.
Being blown out of proportion.
Yeah, definitely.
So like, see, off the back of some of these discussions, obviously we kind of touched on legislation. We had a representative for Fans Against Criminalisation in against a few weeks ago, talking about the repeal of the Offensive Behaviour Act and obviously legislating against or for free rights or free expression, free speech, etc. It's a bit of a minefield for me. I think as you move into the 21st century, we need legislation that covers how we are in the modern world, and I don't think a lot of what we've got at the moment is fit for purpose just now, never mind where we're going to be in 10 years time. I mean, where are you on this sort of topic? Because I mean, as a sort of free speech advocate, I would assume that you were for as little legislation as possible, but I mean, I don't know if that's true or no.
I don't think I am for as little legislation as possible, but I think my ideal would be a state that works in the best interests of its citizens, which I don't think we've got. So that then does make me, very kind of critical of just legislating to solve problems. And I suppose my motivation is always about like people and society and how it operates. And it's like we were saying with the kind of Canada example, you can legislate, but it doesn't solve any of the underlying kind of problems that made that debate spark up. So I'm kind of more interested in solving them at that level and how you navigate that amongst people and make people's lives kind of easier and better. But I don't think it's impossible to legislate for issues relating to kind of freedom and that kind of thing. I mean, the sort of like founding principles of free speech in like political theory and stuff talk about it as being like the ability of just normal citizens to hold power to account without being punished for it. And it has this kind of bit in it that's called the harm principle that is like an exception where you can't just use your free speech to harm other people. Now, I think that's a very sensible kind of definition of free speech, but it's not really in the interests of like the state to legislate for that. So that's where you kind of run into these issues, I think. So, you know, the law is not always like the best kind of arbiter.
So one of the things that in terms of like, as you say, harm and, you know, this type of notions are legislating for or against free speech, like where are you in terms of, and I think this is something that's going to become more and more sort of important to us again as we go down the line, whistleblowers. Like obviously in the media, they'll have probably covered quite a lot on the Chelsea Mannings, the Edward Snowdens and various other incarnations that have happened in recent years. And that's going to become more and more a thing as governments become more and more secretive about what they're doing. Like, how do we protect somebody like a whistleblower? How is their free expression like protected in a, you know, largely authoritarian sort of technical state? You know
Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult question because I don't know the kind of specifics of the law around that. All I would say is obviously my sort of principle on it is that those people absolutely should be protected. And I think they are. I mean, and I know that journalists are very... a lot of journalists can be like really grandstandy and think that it's like the best, most important profession in the world, and I don't buy into all that. But I think that what it does give you is like a real sense of moral duty, and all the journalists I know would go to extreme lengths to protect sources and protect whistleblowers and that kind of thing, and I think that's really important. But I don't know, I mean, the law clearly doesn't always work because you've got people who do end up being punished for whistleblowing and that kind of thing. But again, I think it just presents you with this existential issue about how do you get a state who their interest is to protect themselves? How do you get them to protect people who kind of want to hold them to account? I don't know what the answer to that is apart from a completely different system.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean the Snowden, and especially the Snowden and what's the guy that's in the embassy in London? Assange one. That really, like, I really think that these are important issues of like this time, and we're just ignoring them. They've went away. I mean, they're spoke about in sort of non-mainstream terms, and almost like they want them imprisoned. I mean, there's a whole movement in America to get Snowden like punished.
Yeah.
Well, it's like in Russia, isn't it? I mean, these guys have to hide. I mean, Assange has been in a cupboard in the Ecuadorian embassy for how many years now? You know
yeah, although I wouldn't put Assange in the same category because what he's hiding from is a rape conviction.
Well, yeah, true.
Which is quite different than a sort of whistleblower type affair. But yeah, I share your concern about Snowden and Chelsea Manning and all of these people who have done something that, you know, if you want to talk in sort of capitalist right-wing terms, is arguably like a real kind of act of martyrdom, which isn't a word that like comes naturally to me, but if we're going to talk in those people's language, they've acted completely in the national interest, and yet that, you know, they end up in these awful situations. So something needs to change.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more people need to be told about what happened. I think
what they've highlighted is, you know, perpetration a level of harm on the public and in the public interest. So I think in those circumstances, when somebody, you know, blows the whistle on, you know, governmental or, you know, whatever behaviour, if those two boxes are ticked in, there's absolutely no way anybody should be having to move to Russia or hide in embassies or, you know, go to jail for prolonged periods of time. It's insane, because the good that they have done as a result of being open and speaking freely is vastly outweighed by, you know, any damage that could be done. You know, you've got assets in the field and you're like, well, take them out then. You know what I mean? Like, what do you want? You might leave them there, let their bone, get them out. Like, stop whinging. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I don't get it, man. It's
I'm in the same boat. I just don't understand. I don't understand why people aren't more outraged about that than what they are about a vegan sausage roll.
Exactly.
You know
I mean that sort of brings us back to like the very first kind of thing that we discussed, which is that like these people who claim to be these massive protectors of free speech just aren't caring about the real free speech issues.
Yeah.
And in many cases they're actively encouraging the like shutdown of dissent.
Absolutely. I did a wee bit in the blog recently where we discussed notions of sort of outrage and like notions of offence and stuff like that, and I kind of commented along the lines of that the people who use terms like snowflake and cuck the most are the ones that tend to be the quickest to be like, you've offended me. You know what I mean? Like, so there's that, sort of juxtaposition of those two things where they want the right to say whatever outrageous bullshit that they want to say, whether it be about sausage rolls or Brexit or anything in between that spectrum. But the minute you then challenge that view, it's, oh my God, I'm offended by that. And you're like, hold on, guy, that door does not swing both ways. Like, it's either all okay or like none of it's okay. Like, you don't really get to pick and choose which parts of free speech work for you and don't. It should either be, I can call you or say whatever I want to say, or, we need a legislative process that tells us where the lines are.
Yeah, and I suppose like the thing that's really crucial, which I maybe haven't even mentioned yet, is like that the way that the free speech conversation operates completely obscures like any kind of power relation. So like you get the right wing getting like really upset about like sausage rolls and like razor adverts and stuff. You get the left wing being really upset about like rape threats and like the like shutdown of protests and stuff like that.
Cognitive dissonance involved is
and the way that it's constructed is like as if all these things are just on one level and it's all just about whether you're allowed to speak or not, and there's no kind of interrogation of like the different implications for people.
Sexual assault is exactly the same thing as sausage rolls.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, in their worldview, apparently it is.
Yep.
And that's that's a very deliberate kind of operation of how they've constructed free speech, is that it completely just flattens out any kind of power disparity between different groups in society.
So how did you feel about, I seen you were tweeting about the Grand Wizards.
I mean, I
think it's
your tweet about the lassie for Laura Koonsberg, whatever her name is absolutely nailed it. Like, even if they didn't mean it, like, how did you get this so wrong?
I mean, her reporting of that, and I'm not a person who, and as I said, I worked at the BBC briefly, and I really admire a lot of the journalists there and a lot of what they do. I don't go in for this sort of blanket like bashing the BBC thing, but the way that she reported that was outrageous. I mean, to not make the connection between the term and the KKK, and then to just to the way to react to everyone's outrage by just doing like this hurried sort of defense of them. Another journalist would have made that the story. I mean, there was the thing yesterday about when one of the Tory, I think it was a Tory MP, used the phrase cultural Marxism, as you mentioned there, which is like quite a clear sort of far right anti-Semitic like dog whistle term. And journalists did make that the story. There was all these headlines saying, Tory MP uses anti-Semitic like language. And that's how a journalist should respond to that. They should spot that straight away, and they should turn around and say to that person, why have you used that term when it's so associated with the far right? I mean, how she could have not made that something like connection to begin with, and then to just accept their defense.
Seen Grand Wizard and being like, hold on, what did I miss there? Scrolling back through.
I mean, I don't know how anyone who's like slightly engaged in politics or society could see that term and think of anything else.
That's it. The first thing that came to my mind was exactly that. It was just like, why is somebody calling something Grand Wizards? And like, it's so triggering, and it's such a prevalent thing with the Ku Klux Klan, like you say. I mean, I didn't even understand what cultural Marxism meant until yesterday. I mean, I'd heard it a few times and was just kind of like, that just sounds like bullshit to me. When I'd heard other people use it and asking like, so what's that? And just X, Y, and Z, and like, all right, okay, but I didn't understand the sort of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that sat behind it, about the sort of powerful Jewish people try to sort of undo Western society. And then you start to think about George Soros and some of the stuff that's been going on about him and how he became a fucking boogeyman, and it's like, why is this guy became a boogeyman?
It's been an ongoing debate, and I think again where, especially in the UK, where the left and right have a disparity in terms of how their issues are being addressed and how they're being debated in the public domain. Like the Labour anti-Semitism row, for me is, in a lot of senses, largely fictitious. I know there are people who have tweeted things that have maybe been over the line, but there's also been a number of people who have been dug up for, a conflation between Israel and Jews. And I know there is obviously a serious connection, but the two should also be sort of separate entities. But then you compare that to actual outright Islamophobia in the Tory party that is like as clear as day, and the reactions to the two are like really disparate. So they are where the Tory thing's a bit like, yeah, I know, we expect Tories to be a bit racist, come on, you know what I mean? Like, whereas like the Labour Party's like, this is unacceptable, and it's been used as a rod to really beat pretty much Jeremy Corbyn round the head for 18 months, and all he did was object to a couple of lines in the sort of National Committee, you know, manifesto about the definition of anti-Semitism. So like, it's still a weird debate where one is there but is not as pronounced as being made the case, and another one on the other side is there prominently and is being completely underplayed. And I'm just like, how does that service anybody? You know what
I mean, I suppose people have made that comparison quite a lot recently, and where I think we can go a bit wrong on it is that sometimes the conclusion that people seem to come to is that there should be less of an issue made of the Labour anti-Semitism thing to bring it down to the level of the Tory Islamophobia thing. Whereas I would say the opposite, which is that any kind of issue of that kind of thing within party politics or any context should absolutely be interrogated by the media and held to account. But as you say, kind of on an even footing, because you know, it's the press that are dictating who gets the attention or whatever.
Rape and sausage rolls is the same thing on one side, but Islamophobia and anti-Semitism not the same thing on the other side. You know what I mean? Like, as you say, that leveling out.
It's pretty crazy. What's your feeling on Brexit?
Oh,
in
general,
what we were planning on doing was get the last sort of 4 guests just to talk about Brexit for about 10-15 minutes. Now I was going to put it together and put it out on the days leading up to 29th of March, but it's kind of pointless now. It doesn't look like we'll leave, unless we leave without a deal on the 29th of March, but I don't think that's going to happen. But it's been a bit of a fucking shit show. I mean,
well, totally.
I mean, we're still at the first stage of like agreeing how we'll leave, and then I think what people don't understand is that the level of negotiating that's going to need to happen after we decide how we're going to leave.
This is just the framework for negotiation we can't agree on.
How do you see it panning out? Do you think we'll get a people's vote? I mean, nearly there's been reports of 1 million people, 2 million people, a couple of thousand people in London at the weekend, depending on what source you go to. But I think there was a substantial amount of people that marched, and I was sitting with my girlfriend and she was like, that's amazing. I was like, well, we did it for the Iraq War and look where that fucking got us. Absolutely nowhere. So I actually don't have an opinion on where this is going to land, because I've got absolutely no idea.
Yeah, I don't think I do either. People keep asking me as well.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. But I don't think any of us have got any like frame of reference for what's going to happen. I suppose my view on like Brexit in general is, you know, I voted to remain. I'd still vote to remain. I think there's lots of problems with the EU. But the terms of that debate left me no option but to vote for remain. There's no such thing, I don't think, as a left-wing Brexit when it's being dictated by, you know, Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson and all these people. So I don't put any stock in the sort of Lexit arguments, though I have sympathy with some of their criticisms of the EU. But I think that it's a very irresponsible answer to say, well, then we want to advocate for Brexit under these conditions.
I'm the exact same. I mean, I said to a lot of people at the time that I'm no fan of the EU in a general way, but I'm absolutely not going to vote for Brexit based on immigration.
Absolutely.
That's nonsense, based on figures that they're throwing about, which is nonsense. None of it's true. I mean, there are definitely plenty of arguments to be made, maybe even for the evolution of the EU, but every single argument that was made to me during that campaign was just, to my ears, absolute fucking nonsense. So I couldn't vote for it. One of the things that was actually like a serious concern of mine is Article 13. I don't like. Do you know much about?
Nope.
So Article 13.
I'm looking at you blankly.
Article 13 of the EU is the internet. So it's basically the EU's version of net neutrality.
Oh yeah.
Or the opposite of net neutrality. They're trying to make it so that you can't use other people's content and anything, so you wouldn't be able to share memes as part of a sort of consequence. But it's almost like the they're getting control of the internet. That's what they're trying to do.
Right.
Like, to me, is that they're trying to just...
It's going to happen everywhere, but there's going to corporations are going to monetize the internet, and we're going to be pushed out. It's already happening in America.
Yeah, but that's one of the sort of major concerns to me, is that the EU and also some of the stuff that's happened in Spain, like the Catalonia vote, and looking at that, and you're thinking that these are supposed to be... We're told that the EU is like going to uphold these human rights. Well, where are these people's human rights? And I live in a country that I want to be independent. How would I be treated if I decided to take to the streets and say that I want to live in an independent country?
The UK government sent, the army up to quell as post, a yes vote.
Yeah.
Would the EU stand by and just let it happen? And I think Catalonia suggests they probably would.
Yeah, I think there's loads of... I mean, the EU is a kind of institution born out of neoliberalism, right? So I'm never going to kind of align with all their ideologies. I mean, the one that gets me particularly is the treatment of the refugee crisis and the way that's been handled pretty terribly, really. The refugees have been completely kind of dehumanized by the EU and just left to fend for themselves. But it's just, we're in the situation that we're in. I've got my politics are such that I would love us to be in a completely different situation. Yeah. Vastly different. And I love talking about these kind of utopian ideas and all of that stuff. But we are in the structural reality that we're in. Yeah. And I just, as much as I've got these criticisms of the EU, it's just what I said before. I just can't see any situation in which you can have a kind of left-wing progressive exit from it under these circumstances. I think it's, has to be about remaining and reforming in a big way. Yeah. But I don't know how you make that argument to people who are now really angry that what they voted for hasn't happened. Yeah. Because all that does is encourage this really black and white, like uniform thinking. So there's not really much room for nuance anymore, where nuance is exactly what we need.
People have been whipped up in a frenzy to the point that they won't see, the finer detail of what's going on. And I'm kind of with you in this respect. I was following Brexit pretty, what I thought was sort of reasonably well up until about 10 days ago when all hell broke loose, and I've just lost all grasp of really
just kind of switched off. Yeah, I don't know if it's like self-protection. I just like can't engage anymore.
For me as well, where I just went, I can't follow this anymore. I'm just going to, it's going to happen anyway. Let's just roll with it.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the other thing to say about Brexit is that, my view on it is that it was the wrong answer to like the right question. Yes, so exactly. I think like a lot of people, and I know I take the argument that like maybe the decisive votes in the Brexit referendum were like sort of home counties racists, who I don't have any time for at all. Yeah. But in terms of like the sort of working class, like angry, shafted by austerity vote, they absolutely should have been asked these questions about like, what's your life like? Does it need to change? Yeah. But like Brexit shouldn't have been the framework for that. But it was taken as that.
Constituencies and saying, how can I serve you in Parliament? They took the seats and went, right, how can I help this party become more powerful, and how can I, line the pockets of myself and my donors?
And if it hadn't been Brexit, if we'd voted to remain, that sentiment would still be there, and it would still kind of erupt in some other extreme way down the line.
For 40 years, it's not, and a yes to remain would not have been the end of the debate, just the same as joining the European Union was not the end of the debate.
The same as the Hillary Clinton example, where had Hillary Clinton won, she would just be, pushing something into the long grass for a bit longer. Yeah. The Brexit thing's exactly the same, and I think it's a real symbol of the sort of failure of democracy, that those people felt that was the only voice they had, was to vote for this huge, extreme kind of shake-up of everything, because they've been so let down.
America, the UK, there's other places in Europe, like, France at the minute, every, the 18 weekends in a row or something now, they've had yellow vest protests, and so there is a level of disconcert, worldwide, and these, forces are definitely making use of them, and it's through, as you say, the limiting of debate, the reframing of the debate, and taking control of the structures of power that stop people from being able to challenge them.
I mean, who knows where we'll land? I don't even know what I want anymore for it. I mean, because we live in a sort of, it's almost like a sort of scary thing to think that the right could get this sort of anti-democratic, like, sort of foghorn if we do get a people's vote, because ultimately that's what I kind of want. I'm stuck between that and sort of going, you know what, let's just get Brexit and get independent, and I'm sort of stuck between let's revoke Article 50 and let's have another think about what we're doing, and just let's let the shit hit the fan and see what happens, and give them what they want, and but that's so dangerous. Like, it's almost like let's just roll the dice.
Because we're going to even, and let's say the ideal scenario is the UK goes through with a no deal Brexit. Scotland at some point in the future after that becomes independent. Like, do you know how destabilising it is to have like a neighbour, a geographic neighbour that is, you know, look at how Greece, the effect something like Greece had on the wider sort of EU, because that state was like so unstable financially. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's, you know, I think what they're doing now in terms of the SNP, where they're trying to mitigate, trying to obviously voice to a certain degree like discontent, and you know, in Parliament, I think they're doing a really good job. And people are going, well, why do they care about the UK? They're after independence. But while we're in the UK, it's important that they make as positive a contribution as possible, so that the 6% swing we need for no voters actually happens, because we can't rely on the 45% that are already there, because they already got beat. You know what I mean? Like, so how do you do it? Well, you make a positive contribution in the short term. And I think it's going to be better for us long term to have a stable RUK once we go. You know what I mean? Like, but how that happens at this point, I've got absolutely no idea.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, to go back to your point about the sort of danger of like different outcomes, I think we're in a position now where it's all dangerous. I think there's going to be some kind of, you know, I guess in an ideal world where everyone was just going to be happy with whatever happened, I would want us to revoke Article 50 and just not exit, and, you know, have like a national conversation about how we could address people's concerns and how things could be better. That's not possible in the current climate. So you either, you know, you do that and you really upset people who already felt like they didn't have a voice, and that leads to huge kind of disruption in society that I think could be really dangerous. Or you exit and, you know, God knows what happens then. I mean, that sounds terrifying to me. There's no precedent for it. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. If you look at some of the stuff that's coming out about nuclear bunkers getting activated, bits of the M6 getting paved over to have backups of lorries try to get to Calais and all this sort of stuff, it is almost like scary as fuck. Like potential martial law.
I think it's all scary. And I think under a different government or in a different kind of political system, the ideal situation at this point, or, you know, a few years ago, would have been to get out into communities that voted for Brexit on these kind of like austerity grounds, and have a conversation with them about how Brexit isn't the answer to their problems, and immigration isn't the cause of their problems, and all of these things, and do that community organising, community building work that empowers people. I hate the word empower, but like that it gives people, you know, builds power within communities and makes people feel like their voice counts for something, and then make the case for staying in the EU and reforming and all of that stuff. But our government is never going to do that. No. I mean, arguably, like a Labour government under Jeremy Corbyn might come closer to doing that. That's a whole different debate. They've got quite a good community organising operation, but they're not in power. And we're too far down the line now for that. So, you know, it's a real failure of our political system.
I think as well, and this is kind of maybe trying to bring things back around to, you know, where we started on sort of free speech and people's understanding it. Like, Brexit was something that allowed people to voice an opinion on the situation, a really complex, nuanced thing like the EU, without really understanding it. And I think a lot of our politicians kind of went into that because it was what they ideologically wanted to happen. So you had places like Sunderland voting against their best interests when, you know, Nissan, they're now away elsewhere. And it's happening up and down the country. So, like, that debate, and we touched on it with guys like fans against criminalisation as well, is that, like, to defeat these issues and to overcome these issues as a society, we need to be able to have an adult debate. We need to be able to talk to each other in open and honest terms. And I think a lot of the things that we've discussed today, like obviously how the media portray things, how, you know, we perceive things, it really goes against that. And I don't know that any government really could have had the conversation that personally anyway, that's what I don't know any government could have had the conversation that would need to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know it's even a conversation. I think it's a national therapy session we need rather than a conversation, to be honest with you.
And a national like reckoning with ourselves. And I mean, I say ourselves, I'm talking about the whole UK.
Yeah.
You know, a reckoning with that history and our place in the world and how we treated other countries and how we treat our citizens. And I mean, what government's going to do that?
No,
Especially not a Tory one.
Let's have a 5-day debate, and day one we're going to talk about Winfield and Grenfell and Windrush, and they'll be like, no, that's not what's happening. You know what I mean? Like, even though these are all legitimate things,
Or the Empire.
with the historical slavery and whatnot, it's just no, it's just not going to happen. And these are all things that have contributed to getting us here, definitely.
Where can people find you? So,
I'm on Twitter at Eve_Rebecca, or my website is everebeccalivingston.com, and that's where there's like a section on there that's about the No Offence newsletter where people can sign up.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was
Really
fun.
appreciate it. Yeah,
Really nice conversation. Like I think that part of the worry, this reinforces this part of the worry is sometimes you read people and you're thinking we're not going to agree on everything. How will this conversation go? We'll go spend an hour talking about stuff and I don't want to really go, I don't agree with you, but clearly, like, you know what I mean, like you can sit down and have a nice conversation with people that you don't fully agree with 100%, but find common ground and also like sort of express yourself in a way that doesn't offend people. I think that's
definitely
part of what we're doing. So thanks for coming on, and I'll definitely have you back if we've ever got anything else that we want to talk about.
Absolutely.
But cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lightning falls when there is panic in the sky. Thunder calls when all but fear is left to die. You tell it like it's fantasy, something that you're never going to be. Same old story every day. There's just one thing that I have to say, that if we believe, if we trusted you, then I don't know why you say the things you do. You'd see a whole new way to be, giving honest answers and not those lies to me. Empty halls now filled with echoes of their past. Honor stars, they lived each day like it's their last. You tell it like it's fantasy, something that you're never going to be. Same old story every day. There's just one thing that I have to say, that if we believe, if we trusted you, then I don't know why you say the things you do. You'd see a whole new way to be, giving honest answers and not those lies to me. I can tell that you're on a mission just to break the walls down time and time again. If it wasn't true, would it be okay to break the walls down time and time again? that if we believe, if we trusted you, then I don't know why you say the things you do. You'd see a whole new way to be, giving honest answers and not those lies to me. Believe, if we trusted you, then I don't know why you say the things you do. You'd see a whole new way to be, giving honest answers and not those lies to me.